Hello and welcome to the DSP Leaders World Forum 2021. I'm Guy Daniels, Director of Content at TelecomTV, and coming up now is our Challenges and Opportunities Roundtable, where we'll be discussing how to define a new DSP and vendor dynamic for better business outcomes. Now, the disaggregation of the network promises to open up the vendor supply chain, stimulate innovation and provide telcos with greater choice. All well and good, but hold on a moment. Telcos are well known for their overly complex procurement processes and low-risk approach. Equally, vendors are often reluctant to abandon dated commodity-based pricing. What we need now is a new DSP and vendor dynamic, but are we willing and able to create one? Well, let's find out what our special guests think, and I'm delighted to introduce Diego Lopez, Senior Technology Expert at Telefónica, Mattias Fridström, Chief Evangelist for Telia Carrier, Susan James, Senior Director Telecommunications Strategy with Red Hat, Klaus Martiny, Senior Program Manager at Deutsche Telekom, and Peter Wennerström, Head of Strategy, Business Development and Business Operations for Europe at Nokia. Hello everyone and welcome to our State of the Industry debate on enhancing the ecosystem. Now, my editorial colleague Ray Lemaitre and I have put together some discussion points based on feedback we received from our TelecomTV viewers. These are the areas that they really want to hear more about. Now, our first point is that telcos are just not set up to engage easily or productively with new technology suppliers or partners, and to be honest, show little sign of updating their processes. Klaus, maybe I could start by putting this one to you, that these processes are just outdated and we're not going to see much change, and that's a problem.
I think you are right. So this is a problem for the time being. The procurement processes are too complex, I think, and it doesn't meet the current need. If you like to bring new vendors on board or new products on board, I think it's really, really difficult to do it quickly in the right manner and use all these business opportunities with new products or technology can bring to you. And we have to think about how we can optimize it, streamline it, and especially also for smaller companies, it's really difficult for them to meet our requirements and our expectations.
Thank you, Klaus. Mattias, what do you think of this?
No, I fully agree with you. I think, there is an ambition from telecom operators that we want to work with new suppliers and new vendors. But I think, the way we have complicated our own setup makes it extremely difficult to bring in someone new. Sometimes you feel, oh, this tool is going to be perfect for us. Let's purchase the tool. Let's install the tool. And then you find out later that it needs to connect to 8 other systems that you have built before. Some of them are really old legacy systems. Some are brand new. And I think the way we have set up ourselves with the processes and everything just makes it very complicated. I really feel, when we talk about this in here, the ambition is there. And we bring it in and it looks great. But then you find out, wow, it needs to connect to practically everything. And that's when it becomes really, really complicated. But I really think we want to.
Diego, you're our third operator on the panel. Do you feel that the processes now are too complicated, but there is a willingness to change?
I think that the willingness is there. The complication is that it's not only, I would say it's not only about the processes themselves, it's about the cultures inside the organizations and the organizational structures as well. And if you think about it, it's not only about the operators, it's the whole industry, it's the whole environment in which all the actors, operators, vendors, regulators, even customers have become used to a particular way of behaving. And in some cases, when you come with something that should translate into an enhancement of what we are doing or how we are doing it, even the people that could find a benefit out of this are reluctant, doubtful. Probably because, as you said, it's an industry that has strong aversion to risk, and the situation is that it's a quite mature environment in which whatever you move, you have to be completely sure that it's for good. And again, it's a cultural thing, I would say, basically.
And Susan, you sit on the other side of the fence, being a vendor who supplies to CSPs. What do you see as the current situation as being overly complex?
I think it's very different depending on, where you're looking in the network. And I think we see certainly in the sort of OSS, BSS space, certainly a more willingness to embrace. And I think certainly with 5G and the focus on verticals, there's a lot more innovation, I would say, and new players coming into the market there. But I think it also puts a responsibility on suppliers where you have new players coming into the market to do a lot of that sort of heavy lifting and coordination before we go to service providers. So having sort of fully vetted solutions where we've put it together, tested it, make sure it works, is something that becomes crucial and enabling service providers to be able to adopt to new technology and bring in new partners. And I think that's certainly the ambition with some of the activities around O-RAN, where you see new players coming into that space, but you also see it in the willingness to embrace sort of public cloud and other new players in that space.
Peter, Nokia has been supplying to the industry for a very, very long time now. But do you see there's still room for CSPs and telcos to change and improve?
Absolutely, I do. Now, we do see the entrance of new players into the ecosystem, right? But if you look at the bulk, the heart of the networks, what we as Nokia are delivering, which is basically the key components of the digital infrastructure, which is, the IP networks, the optical networks, the fixed and wireless networks that really are the heart of the underlying infrastructure. We are, we as together with our competitors are the main suppliers of that. But as you look into new domains like cloudification, you do see new entrants. The partnership we announced with Google to deliver 5G on public cloud, for example, is one way in which we're seeing a new player, a new entrant into what was then traditionally the telco space. So I think we are seeing the development of new entrants into that, whereas we're still seeing at the heart underlying, and perhaps to some extent not really visible, is the underlying infrastructure, which is absolutely necessary to bring all the services to the end users. Right?
And Klaus, you want to add a comment?
Yes, I have a comment. I like to challenge ourselves a little bit because what Peter said is completely right. We have new players coming in the game, new companies coming in and deliver their service. I have a but on the operator side, maybe we are too complex and we are not fast enough to change our processes. But I like to say as well, if you compare what's going on in the telecom market between the big operators and the big vendors, there's always a game. If you companies coming aboard, smaller companies, sometimes they have to make a fight against the operators concerning the process, but also in the competition area to the big vendors. Big vendors sometimes have a good idea to blocking new companies to coming on board. That is what I see as well. I think it's a game which we have to solve for all of us, for operators and for vendors, but smaller companies, I find for them it's much, much harder to do that. And the fairness sometimes a little bit missing. Of course, we also all like to do business, but sometimes I have an impression we should ask ourselves doing things right.
Well, let's move on to startups now. Diego, is it true that really until they provide true plug-and-play elements, most startups are just simply too risky for the operators to engage with?
Yeah, well, basically, we have to take into account that we are talking about something that is that are critical infrastructures, as Peter said, especially when it comes to the core of the networks, not necessarily to the mobile core, to what is constitute the kernel of the networks, if you like, and well, they have to work at any cost. And this is something that we have been experiencing recently as part of all these lockdowns and the massive telecommuting, etc. So for sure it's risky, for sure it's perceived as something that is complicated to fulfill the expectations that customers and regulators have on operators if you start playing games with other players that are not necessarily, or you're not sure that will deliver. Not only plug and play, I think that this famous, or this common term about being carrier grade, about being able to provide the famous 5 nines, not necessarily in the equipment, but in the whole service, in the whole life cycle, is something that is extremely important. And what is complicated is the way in which operators as well establish that you satisfy these conditions. The processes are lengthy, are requiring a lot of resources from the side of the startup, etc. So it's a combination of situations in which we are dealing with something that is critical, and having these new players playing with something that is critical is something that you have to understand that is complex. What I think is that we should attack this precisely in the way in which we demonstrate the dependability of new solutions on the one hand, and second, something that we had to learn is how to make deployments that are reasonably isolated, so we can make localized tests in environments in which a failure is not or would not be that much critical.
Thank you, Diego. And I know a few more of you want to get in on this question at this point. Mattias, let me come to you first. Does the risk outweigh the reward?
I actually think, a couple of years ago, this was absolutely true. There was no one here daring to try anything new. I think that's still valid for parts of the network. As Diego said, there are certain parts of the network you don't test things in, you don't try things in. But I think we've all realized as a telecom operator that unless we do something now, or we do something fast, and really this fail fast scenario that we've all learned from the hyperscalers and the ones coming in and trying to sort of steal market share or whatever from telecom operators. I think that really learned us now that for us to be in this business, we just need to start to test things. Some things may fail, but then we fail fast and we go on to the next thing. So I would say, a couple of years ago, if someone said, would you love to try this? We would have said, no, that's too risky. We don't do that. We're, as Diego said, carrier grade. You don't test that. But I think today, 2021, we just have to test a lot of stuff. We can't miss on new cool things that's coming up. And I think that's a big difference from a couple of years ago. We just have to be fast now to survive in this business, because there's so many newcomers coming in from everywhere. And unless we develop, we're going to be left behind.
Susan, what are you seeing? Are you seeing the willingness to engage with startups from CSPs is improving?
I really do, and I think it's something that goes through cycles, of course. And I just sort of reflect, if you look, 5-10 years ago, companies like Affirmed and Metaswitch were just starting up. They've grown to such a level now that they've been acquired and actually have many customers around the world. So I think there's yes, there is, but I mean they need to bring some unique value. It can't just be something that everyone else is doing. But also I think the other thing is that a number of service providers are using test markets. So it's not, you don't have to transform all of your operations at the same time. So certainly I see it in pockets. And I think, Telia actually has a test market in Estonia. So I think, when we talk in big picture things, when you look at, individual cases, I think you can find it everywhere, but maybe it doesn't make the headlines to the same degree.
Thank you, Susan. And Peter, you wanted to come in and comment?
I think there are two elements of this. One aspect of it is fundamentally related to trust. So if you're building something which is critical and needs to be resilient and needs to be stand and run according to the 5 nines, as Diego was mentioning, you need to build that with together with companies that you fundamentally trust and place trust in you, right? So trustworthiness of companies, I think, is an incredibly important part. And I do believe that having the right level of trustworthiness, the openness, the auditability, transparency, and ethicality as a company is something that should actually play a larger role as we come into a more open ecosystem with more different players. Now, having said that, I think we also have an onus to build networks that have open APIs where you can come in and test things under in a scenario and under an environment where you don't destroy things while you test it. Exactly as Mattias says, you need to be able to test fast. So we should be able to build networks which have open APIs where you can plug in new services, new capabilities from startups, and basically try them. As Susan says, try them in certain markets, but try them in a way that you can do it quickly and you can do it and see how they work. Right? I think we need both, because we need that kind of innovation and to actually deliver the new kind of services that we need in the market.
Well, let's move on to the another area that our viewers have told us they're very interested in, and that's all about the pricing models. Vendors need to introduce new pricing and payment models and abandon the price per box or price per virtual box model if they want to engage long term with the DSPs. What do we think of that one? Susan, would you like to have a think about that one?
From a business model perspective, I'm not sure I would agree with that premise. I think, in our relationships with the ISVs and suppliers, we don't have a per box model, particularly on software, or we have the ability to be flexible on that model. But I also see that as we start addressing more of these 5G Industry 4.0 scenarios, in many cases that becomes a different business model, because it becomes more of a consortium where service providers are partnering with either systems integrators or cloud providers to be able to take these solutions out to those enterprise customers. And that will not be sold as a box model. It will become more of a mutual success kind of scenarios.
Thank you, Susan. Well, let me first of all go to Mattias. Do you see that vendors are holding on to outdated pricing models, or are they changing?
I think they are changing, but in some way, I don't really care about this. At the end of the day, if the price or the overall cost for us is good, then, the way they price things to us, I don't really think that's a problem, really. What I do think is a bit of a challenge for our industry right now is the transparency of this, because more and more pricing are coming out practically everywhere. I think SD-WAN is a good example there, where people log on to web pages of SD-WAN providers and they see, this box is going to cost that and that type of stuff there, and they make up their own expectation of what the cost is going to be. And then at the end of the day, when we as a service provider buy the service from our vendors and put together the service that we then can sell to an enterprise, there are more things in that we need to buy. There are some licensing fees, some installation fees, blah, blah, blah. And that makes the enterprise believing that the price is going to be this, while we have to explain, there are a few more components in here, so the price is actually going to be that. And I think here the sort of operator industry and the vendor industry can work much more together. I don't think anyone should put full transparency into their pricing on the web everywhere. But right now, there's some things you can find on the web. There are lots of stuff you won't find on the web. And that sometimes complicates it for us when we try to explain to our customer, this is the price for your service. And they say, we've read on the website that it should be this instead. And that's where I think, the pricing models can help us a bit on the operator side. If we have a bit more, a better cooperation with the vendors and suppliers around this, then I think that would be very helpful.
Thank you, Mattias. Peter, any views on the pricing models?
I fundamentally agree with Mattias. I think we can and we should and we are finding ways to adapt pricing models that fit the purpose of the customers we have, because the pricing models should fundamentally reflect the business case and they should scale along the business case of the customer. Otherwise, it simply won't work. It will be too difficult to judge whether or not to make the investment, right? But I think more than that, when we talk about flexibility, is really the flexibility of the network itself. And that might put a challenge to the overall pricing model and how you purchase it. Because fundamentally, as you deliver new DSP services, you want to have a programmable network. And you want that programmable network to be able to deliver a network experience to the user, which is highly malleable, right? And that will, of course, put an onus on making sure that you have pricing models and you have an infrastructure that doesn't have cost drivers and that changed based on the malleability of that network in a way which doesn't sustain your business case. So these things, from my point of view, go hand in hand. As we go into a programmable network, we also need to make sure that we have business cases and business models that support the new kind of services we want to deliver to the market.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone. Let's move on to our next statement. Klaus, I'm going to come to you first on this one, if that's okay. Operators need to do more in-house technology development for their next-gen networks because the current vendor ecosystem is just not quite adequate in a cloud-native environment when we're heading to 5G and beyond and looking possibly post-5G.
I agree with that in some way. Yes, operators have to do more in-house deployment and development because they know what they like to get, what they like to deliver to the customer. For sure, we can discuss it with the vendor as normal, but more in-house deployment and responsibility is also a useful way to moving forward to deliver the service for the future. But there's a risk on this side, and that sometimes I have the impression that it's a little bit underestimated. If you do more in-house deployments, I think then you should be able to operate this own deployments in the long run. And that is sometimes a little bit difficult to do so because it has an impact on your processes internally, new structure, new skills, and this kinds of stuff has to be considered if you're going in the in-house deployment area. And it is a hot topic for the time being in our industry, which we're discussing is widely, but the right way to solve the topic, I think that depends also on the structure of the company, of the operator, and their partnership with the vendors which you have for the time being. I think there's a topic that can help, but it's not for free.
Thank you, Klaus. Peter.
Well, first of all, I'm not sure I agree with the premise, right? That the current vendor ecosystem wouldn't be able to deliver the new kind of 5G and beyond services. I think absolutely we can. And I'm not sure that the solution for the gaps in any kind of needs there are going to necessarily have to come from in-house developments within the CSPs and DSPs. We at Nokia fundamentally believe in open ecosystems, and we are, for that reason, for example, the supporter of the O-RAN Alliance, right? Because an open ecosystem will allow for the additional entrants to come with innovations that you might need to complement with what the existing vendors are able to provide. And that is also a solution to complement moving towards a more in-house development, which you can of course also do if you're big enough and scale enough to do that. Right?
Yeah, thanks. Maybe we should look at more integration work rather than development work. But I know a couple more of you want to comment on this one. Susan, what's your views?
I would agree with Peter on this. I think one of the things that is certainly becomes a challenge if you're doing your own in-house development is how do you actually get the scale? And certainly I think you need to be very careful of the areas that you want to do that. I mean, I think looking at where do you get a competitive advantage becomes absolutely critical. And I think working with an ecosystem, you're going to tap into a much larger pool of ideas to be able to do that. But for sure, putting it together, creating that unique experience is something that always will need to be done by service providers in how they actually translate their brand out to their customer base. So I think it's that I would call it more customization than really full development of applications as such.
Thank you, Susan. And Mattias.
We've actually gone the full development plan ourselves now, and here I represent Telia Carrier, this international part of Telia company. Obviously, the mobile part in our company is still very much driven by larger organizations and open systems and so on. But I think on our side, in our small industry, we need to be super tailor-made, and everyone we're competing with right now in our world is newcomers who have built their systems from scratch, tailor-made for this business. And the only way for us to really survive is based on customer experience. And the best customer experience we can give is, we believe, when we make the systems tailor-made to the way we want to work here. Then I completely agree with Peter and Susan that there are parts where we absolutely should take over on the overall community's developments, building an orchestration for an optical system. No, we shouldn't do that ourselves. There are way better people to do that than us. So let's work together and get those systems working. But I think, the core systems here, like the inventories, the systems in delivery and all that stuff, for us to really stand out and be able to serve our customers the way we believe they should be served, I really only think the only way to do it is to do it ourselves. And that's the journey we're on. I might sit here in 6 months and say it was the most stupid journey we've ever done. But right now it looks promising. And I think that's the way for us to go.
Good. Diego, maybe the premise of this statement was too broad when we say that Telco should do more of the in-house technology development. Maybe there is a role, but to focus on very niche areas.
Well, what I would say is to start with, telcos should go back to be technology companies. They used to be in the past. Right now, after the huge normalization or standardization that we went through when the mobile networks came, etc. If you think about it, the network architecture of whatever the mobile provider is basically the same, because what is standardized is the architecture. They are not the interfaces, they are not the components, it's the architecture itself. This is something that is seemingly changed, and for example, 5G has a different architecture that allows you to mix and match different components. That's and I believe that's a part of in which telcos should make their own technology development, precisely in mixing these pieces. We rely for sure on the on vendors of whatever the size, whatever the nature, to provide these open components that can be combined to build different services and differentiated services, which is the important thing, is about being focused, as Mattias was saying, in our customers, in the particular sectors and the particular needs of customers, and facilitating their experience. So at the end, is something that, if you think about, is very similar to what the move that is going now or have been going on in the past for IT and cloud, etc. You have several components, different elements that you can combine, and you rely on someone that is providing you the basics, the infrastructure, the platform, the basic software components. And again, it's about focusing or refocusing the standardization processes on interfaces, on component-based approaches, rather than standardizing the whole architecture and defining rigid interaction points.
Thank you, Diego. And Klaus, you wanted to make another comment?
Yes, I like the challenge a little bit, because especially about Peter. For sure, the operators have to need higher knowledge and better understanding about the technology, because we're talking all the time about CI/CD processes. And if you're running in CI/CD, then you need more experience, because in the old world, if we had a failure in the network, finally we asked the vendor, please send me a patch which fixes my problem here, but it takes too long. In this new environment, new setup, I think the operators need more knowledge than we have today in order to support the operations people with quick solutions. I think that is not possible. If you describe the problem, go to the vendor, please send me a patch, send me a new script, make a software update or whatever is needed to fix a problem. I think we should be we should be able ourselves to solve the problem with our own people.
Thank you, everyone. We are rattling through our discussion at a rapid rate of knots, but I think we can still get another statement from our community in here. Let's move on a little bit. As service providers move more towards embracing cloud-native methodologies to become more cloud-orientated telcos, does that change the dynamic in itself? I mean, are new investment vehicles needed, for instance, to meet the needs of the cloud-orientated telcos? Is what sufficed previously no longer adequate? We need to rethink how we fund and invest in the whole telecoms model going forward. Any takers for that look at changing the world in quite a rapid, big way?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I know, and you're really right. You know, there are new telecom operators appearing that has absolutely no assets at all, and only sell services that they lease from other services, and they bring a fantastic IT systems, these on-demand services and a lot of things that we should have done many years ago in the telecom industry. That's what they come in with. And I think, the way you can evaluate these companies are very different, because you can't really look at the asset value. You just have to look at, what value do they bring to the market. And I think, the whole investment community are looking through this, and they haven't really made up their mind yet, how to evaluate these companies compared to a traditional telco that owns a lot of fibers, a lot of base stations, a lot of gear in the network simply, So I think that's a huge challenge for the investment market in the end.
I tend to agree with Mattias. I think there's a lot of opportunities for investment market to earn money. For sure, a little bit more under risk than in the old days, because if we have smaller companies which promising a lot, then in the beginning is definitely a kind of a risk which you have to take before you can earn money. But in principle, I think there's a huge opportunity to get something back for your money.
Thank you, Klaus. And Peter?
I think we can distinguish between two different investment vehicles, right? One is the one that is fundamentally related to the underlying infrastructure, which has a much longer investment cycle, and we're seeing different types of companies like tower companies that are taking a larger share of the underlying infrastructure, which has a completely different ROI than what a DSP, which is on top of that infrastructure and maybe on top of a cloud infrastructure, would have. So I think there are several different worlds that we're addressing at once here, right? And those have different investment cycles, and they have different return on investment time horizons as well, and also different risk profiles, obviously. So it's not a homogeneous investment market in that sense.
Indeed, yes. Thanks for that, Peter. Diego?
This is something that is important, is that we should not forget about the need for making the whole system sustainable. I mean, what is important is that for sure, smaller, more agile companies can appear and can offer their services on top of an existing infrastructure. But if operating a bulk infrastructure that you need to make it bulk, because you have to reach with your fibers every single household or business, and you need to have base stations all over the place, because otherwise people are not getting a connection to the mobile services. If we fail in making this profitable as well, I mean, if what we do is that we drain all potential profit from these dinosaur-like organizations into the small, agile, etc., what we are doing is that we are making the whole system unsustainable, or that what I don't think it would be a good outcome is that this could be considered as something that can only be provided by governments. And that would be, I would say, a significant mistake if we go that way.
Thank you. And we just have time for a final comment from Susan.
Yeah, I think that it's going to develop over the next coming years, because I think what we see is there are many different players, and we sort of touched on some of the tower companies that will want to have assets out towards the edge. And I think that, whether they need to be owned or whether they can be shared across a number of different, companies is something that will be investigated and trialed, I would say, in the market coming forward. So, and as Peter pointed out, the investment levels and the return and time horizons are all going to be slightly different than they are with the traditional, invest in your network and do the return that way. So I think it's going to change a lot, and it will be sliced differently to how we've traditionally seen those investments.
Thank you very much, Susan. And with that, we have to draw our discussion to a close. Thank you all very much for participating today and sharing your views and opinions. Now, if you're watching this on day 2 of our DSP Leaders World Forum, then don't forget to send us any questions you have on the subject, and we'll try and answer them in our live after show programme later today. Otherwise, please take a look at all the sessions from this year's World Forum. We're making them all available for on-demand viewing throughout the week. Today's focused on enhancing the ecosystem, but we are covering 4 other important topics as part of this year's event, as you can see here. We have a great lineup of speakers this year, so please keep watching and do get in touch with us and let us know your views. For now though, thank you and goodbye.